The champagne didn't feel like a celebration. It felt cold and sticky as it dripped from my hair onto the silk blouse I had bought specifically for this night. Brad stood on the elevated stage of the ballroom, the empty Magnum bottle dangling from his hand like a club, laughing into the microphone. He told the 300 guests that this is what happens when the help forgets their place. He called it a baptism. He told the crowd that I needed to cool off. You know that moment? The one where the world goes quiet. The ringing in your ears stops, and suddenly you aren't sad anymore. You aren't scared. You are just done. I stood there in the middle of the dance floor at the Golden Oak Estate. This was the venue I had built. Not with bricks and mortar, but with sweat, blood, and 15 years of my life. I started as a dishwasher when I was 19. Now, at 34, I was the director of operations. I was the reason the Golden Oak was the premier wedding destination in the state. I was the reason the governor's daughter was getting married here tomorrow. Brad, the owner's son, had been named CEO 3 days ago. He had never worked a service shift in his life. He wore suits that cost more than my car and thought profit margins were something you could adjust by firing the cleaning staff. His mother, Elena, the matriarch who inherited the estate and never lifted a finger to maintain it, sat at the head table. She sipped her wine and watched me dripping wet with amusement. She didn't look away. She smiled. A tight, cruel smile that said I was property. Brad yelled into the mic again. He told everyone to give it up for the little worker bee who was finally leaving the hive. That was how I found out I was fired. Not in a meeting. Not with a letter. But as a halftime show during the rehearsal dinner for the biggest event in our company's history. Elena stood up then. She smoothed her dress and walked over to me. She didn't offer a towel. She leaned in close, smelling of expensive perfume and rot. She whispered that security would escort me out. She told me they were keeping my final commission check to pay for the cleaning bill of the carpet I was dripping on. She told me I was lucky they didn't sue me for incompetence. Incompetence. I looked at her. I looked at Brad, who was high-fiving his college buddies on stage. I looked at the staff, the servers, the lighting technicians, the kitchen crew peering out from the swinging doors. They looked terrified. They knew what Elena and Brad didn't know. They knew I wasn't just the director. I was the nervous system of this entire building. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for my job or my commission. I simply wiped the champagne from my eyes, nodded once, and turned around. The security guard, a guy named Mike who I had hired and trained, looked like he wanted to throw up. He mumbled an apology as he walked me to the side door. I told him it was okay. I told him to keep his head down. I walked into the parking lot. The cool night air hit my wet clothes, and I shivered. But inside, I was burning with a cold blue flame. I sat in my car and looked at the massive estate on the hill. It was glowing with lights I had designed. It was filled with flowers I had sourced. It was running on a schedule I had written. They thought they were firing an employee. They didn't realize they were unplugging the server. I took my phone out. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. First, I opened the admin app for the estate's central management system. The system I had built. The system that controlled the inventory, the vendor contracts, the staff schedules, and the digital keys. Elena and Brad were so arrogant, they hadn't even asked for my passwords. They assumed they had access. They assumed the business just ran itself, like magic. I didn't delete anything. That would be illegal. I didn't destroy data. That would be actionable. I simply logged out. I removed my personal email as the recovery contact. I removed my personal cell phone number from the two-factor authentication alerts. I turned off the auto, renew features for the perishable orders that were scheduled to arrive at 4 a.m. for the governor's daughter's wedding. Then I drove home, took a hot shower, and poured myself a glass of cheap wine. I slept like a baby. The next morning, my phone started buzzing at 5:30 a.m. It was the head chef. I didn't answer. Then the florist. I didn't answer. Then the band leader. Then Brad. Then Elena. Then Brad again. Then a number I didn't recognize, probably the governor's assistant. I put the phone on silent and made pancakes, You have to understand something about high-end events. They are a house of cards. They look solid and beautiful from the outside, but they are held together by tension and precision. If you pull out the bottom card, gravity does the rest. By 8 a.m., I had 57 missed calls. I decided to answer one. Just one. It was Marco, the fresh produce supplier. He was screaming. He told me the gates were locked. He told me nobody was answering the loading dock buzzer. He told me he had $10,000 worth of exotic truffles and orchids sitting in a truck that was losing refrigeration, and if he didn't get a signature in 5 minutes, he was driving away. I told Marco that I no longer worked for Golden Oak. I told him that Brad was the new CEO and he would have to authorize the delivery. Marco laughed. He used a few colorful words to describe Brad. He reminded me that his contract was with me, personally. He trusted me. He didn't trust a trust fund kid in a shiny suit. He asked me what he should do. I took a sip of my coffee. I told him that if I were him, I wouldn't leave unpaid product with a company that fires its director the night before a major event. I told him the credit check on Golden Oak might look a little different on Monday. Marco thanked me. He hung up. I imagine he turned that truck around with a smile. The collapse happened in slow motion, and then all at once. Around noon, I turned on the local news. The governor's daughter's wedding was the social event of the season, so there were news vans parked outside the estate gates. The reporter looked confused. She said there were reports of shouting coming from inside the grounds. She said caterers were seen leaving the premises. I sat on my couch and watched the disaster unfold through the lens of a news camera and the frantic text messages from my friends on the inside. Here is what happened. Without me there to override the security protocols, the digital key system reset at 6 a.m. This was a safety feature I had installed to prevent unauthorized access. Only the director could bypass it. Brad didn't have the code. Nobody could get into the wine cellar. Nobody could get into the walk-in freezers. The kitchen staff stood in the hallway for 3 hours while Brad tried to kick the door down. When they finally called a locksmith, it was too late. The specialized ice sculptures had melted because the freezer alarm went to my phone, and I wasn't there to trigger the backup generator. Then came the power. The estate ran on a complex grid that required manual load balancing, when the stage lights and the industrial ovens were running simultaneously. I used to do this from an iPad while walking around the venue. At 2 p.m., right as the bride was walking down the aisle, the main breaker tripped. Complete darkness. The backup lights didn't kick in. Why? Because the maintenance contract for the generator had expired 3 days ago. I had the renewal contract on my desk, ready to sign. But I had been fired before I could pick up the pen. Imagine the scene. The governor of the state sitting in the dark. The bride crying. The air conditioning cutting out on a 90-degree day. And Brad sweating through his suit, screaming at the staff, blaming everyone but himself. But the real knife in the heart wasn't the power. It was the staff. You see, people like Elena and Brad think money buys loyalty. They think a paycheck buys silence. They are wrong. Respect buys loyalty. Protection buys loyalty. I had spent 15 years protecting my team from Elena's temper and Brad's incompetence. When Brad started screaming at the head chef, blaming him for the melted ice and the locked doors, the chef didn't take it. He took off his apron. He walked out. Then the sous chefs followed. Then the servers. Then the bartenders. It was a labor exodus. A silent, coordinated walkout. They didn't strike. They just quit. They realized that without me acting as the buffer, there was no amount of money worth dealing with the owners. By 5 p.m., the Golden Oak was a ghost town. The wedding party had evacuated to a hotel downtown. The governor was reportedly threatening to sue for emotional distress and breach of contract. And that was when I finally called my lawyer. Not a family lawyer. A corporate shark named Sarah, who specialized in wrongful termination and defamation. We met on Monday morning. The estate was closed. The fallout was catastrophic. The reviews were already destroying them online. 1 star. 0 stars. A nightmare. The Fire Festival of Weddings. Sarah listened to my story. She looked at the video of Brad pouring champagne on me. She looked at the employment contract that stated I was owed a 6-month severance package if terminated without cause. She looked at the accusation of theft regarding the commission check. She smiled. It was the smile of a predator seeing a wounded gazelle. She told me we weren't just going to sue for the severance. We were going to sue for defamation of character. Brad had announced to 300 potential employers, industry peers, that I was incompetent and needed to cool off. He had destroyed my professional reputation in a public forum. We filed the suit on Wednesday. Elena called me on Thursday. Her voice was different this time. It wasn't arrogant. It was thin, trembling. She told me we needed to talk. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said they were willing to hire me back. They would even give me a raise. I put the phone on speaker so Sarah could hear. Sarah leaned over and whispered that I should ask about the governor. So I did. I asked, "How did the wedding go, Elena?" There was a long silence. Then, she started crying. She said the governor was suing them for $5 million. She said the brand was ruined. She said vendors were refusing to deliver unless paid in cash up front. She said Brad was hiding in his office, drinking. She begged me to come back and fix it. She said I was the only one who knew how the systems worked. I looked at my living room wall. I had repainted it yesterday. A nice calm blue. I told her that my consulting fee was $500 an hour, with a minimum retainer of $50,000 paid in advance, and that I would not be returning as an employee. I would be returning as an external crisis management consultant. She gasped. She called me ungrateful. She said I was blackmailing them. I corrected her. I told her that blackmail is a crime. This was capitalism. This was the free market. Supply and demand. The supply of people who knew how to run her business was exactly one. The demand was infinite. She hung up. They didn't pay the retainer. Not then. They tried to fight it. Brad went on social media and tried to spin the story. He made a video claiming I had sabotaged the venue. He claimed I was a hacker. That was a mistake. Sarah added a libel charge to our lawsuit. We subpoenaed the server logs. We proved in court that I hadn't hacked anything. I had simply logged out. The failure wasn't due to sabotage, it was due to their negligence. We proved that the systems failed because the owners didn't know the passwords to their own kingdom. The deposition was brutal. Brad sat there, looking like a child in his oversized suit. Sarah asked him basic questions about the business. What is the amperage limit of the main breaker? He didn't know. Who is the primary contact for the generator maintenance? He didn't know. What is the password for the vendor portal? He didn't know. By the end of it, it was clear to everyone in the room, the judge, the stenographer, the opposing counsel, that Brad wasn't a CEO. He was a mascot. And Elena was a negligent owner who had allowed her hostility toward me to destroy her own asset. They settled. They had to. The settlement was confidential, but let's just say I bought my own house. Cash. The Golden Oak didn't survive. The governor's lawsuit drained their insurance. The reputation damage killed their bookings. 6 months later, I drove past the gates. There was a for sale sign on the lawn. The grass was overgrown. The lights were off. Brad moved to another state. Elena moved into a condo. I started my own event planning firm. I called it The Foundation, because that is what matters. Not the glitter, not the champagne, not the speeches. The foundation. The work you don't see. Most of the old staff works for me now. The chef, the security guard Mike, the lighting crew. We handle the biggest events in the city. And we have a strict policy in our contracts, 0 tolerance for disrespect. Sometimes, new clients ask me why I'm so expensive. They ask why my contract has so many clauses about operational control. I tell them the truth. I tell them that I know what happens when you undervalue the person holding the keys. I tell them that peace of mind costs money. And sometimes, when I'm at a venue late at night, watching the lights go down and the crew packing up, I think about that glass of champagne. I think about the cold, sticky feeling of humiliation. It was the most expensive drink Brad ever bought. It cost him everything. So, if you're the person holding the keys, if you're the one keeping the lights on while someone else takes the credit, listen to me. Don't scream. Don't fight. Just wait. And when the time is right, just log out. Thank you for listening. Truly, if this story touched you, I'd love for you to like and subscribe to hear more about how we take our power back.